Hi, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's Leslie again, and I would like to do another video today as a way of recapping, as it were, the results of my own study in the area of Islamic studies with a focus on exegesis and jurisprudence. And and I have been doing this research, if you like, as a way of trying to get a better understanding for myself, first of all, as after I have left the research institute, the International Institute of Advanced Islamic Studies here in Malaysia, and after having worked for 5 years at the Islamic Science University of Malaysia, also here in Malaysia, there were certain questions that remained with me after leaving these two formal establishments of Islamic studies. And in the work that I have been doing since then, I have been, as it were, grappling with these questions and trying to come up with some answers along the way. So let me just begin by stating that I appreciate a great deal all the things that I have learned at these institutions, and I have made many fine friends there, and I have met many fine Muslims. So whatever I am going to discuss here is not to be taken as, in any sense, a sort of criticism of any of my former colleagues. I mean, we are all in this together, so to speak, the search for truth and the search for knowledge, which in fact we are encouraged to do by none other than Allah Ta'ala himself in the Quran. And what I'm trying to say, yes, we are advised to increase our knowledge and continue ensuring that our knowledge remains true and relevant and suitable for also for our contemporary time and age. So here I would just like to share once again some of the insights or results that I have come across in this journey, and perhaps I can just mention a few of my sources that I have been relying on, apart from, of course, Al-Quran, which is the first source of reference for me, as it is for, I think, nearly all Muslims. I have also looked into the work of some scholars and benefited from it. And so for the viewers, I would like to mention their names in case they also themselves would like to follow up on these works. But let me first mention that my work can also be found on academia under my legal name, which is Leslie Terabesi, and pretty much the same work can also be found on ResearchGate. However, there it is listed under my Muslim name, which is how my friends know me here in Malaysia, and that name is Abdul Karim Abdullah. Let me just mention who are these sources that I have found beneficial in getting a better grip on what exactly went wrong, so to speak, to borrow Bernard Lewis' phrase, in a Muslim civilization, because I think most Muslims agree that many things went right, there's no doubt about it, but a few things also didn't quite go, how do I put it, perhaps as they should have gone. There were some issues that arose along the way, and some divisions arose as a result of those issues as well. And of course, we would all like to see, so to speak, a greater unity of the Ummah, and also we would like to see the restoration of, if possible, of the Ummah, as it were, to its the position it used to have in the early days of Islam, which was a position of leadership and a kind of exemplar for humanity, at large to follow. As we know, Al-Quran informs us that yes, indeed, Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him, is a good example, along with Prophet Ibrahim, alayhi salam, also. And these are examples that are worthy of emulating. And what did they have in common? Well, the one thing they had in common is that they shared the creed of monotheism, which is basically the perhaps the single most important teaching of al-Islam, which of course was also the religion of Ibrahim alayhi salam, and many that followed in his footsteps. For example, the helpers of Jesus, the Hawariyun, are also referred to in Al-Quran as Muslims, and so are many others. It is unfortunate that some translations of the Quran render the word Muslim in the Arabic as someone who submits to the will of God, whenever this reference using the word Muslim is made to any person before the Prophet Muhammad, peace be on him. Why would you want to use a different word than the word that Allah uses in the Quran? I am a little bit puzzled, although I do have an explanation for it. These mistranslations of the word Muslims, I think, are due to the fact that the translators have allowed themselves to be influenced by the so-called doctrine of abrogation, I think, which goes back to Ibn Kathir, if I'm not mistaken, according to which doctrine the Quran basically abrogated the previous revelations, I should say. Well, that is simply not the case, at least not according to the Quran. There are no fewer than 20 verses in the Quran where Allah himself says that this Quran actually confirms, it does not abrogate the previous revelations. There are 10 verses in the Quran which say where the Torah and the Injil, or the Old and New Testaments, are referred to side by side in the same verse. So this is just one of the hurdles that we need to address and overcome. For example, this doctrine of abrogation, which I think has caused a great deal of damage to the knowledge of the Ummah of the religion. And in fact, I may add that nearly all contemporary commentators have resolutely rejected the doctrine of abrogation. Let me just mention a few examples. Muhammad Ghazali, who was a Sheikh of Al-Ghazar, not to be confused with Imam Al-Ghazali. Muhammad Al-Ghazali referred to the idea that a single verse in Surah Tawbah, Surah number 9, verse number 5, the one that speaks of where the expression, quote, kill them wherever you find them, occurs, and which, by the way, expression is taken out of context by many non-Muslims, and unfortunately even by some Muslims. Muhammad al-Ghazali refers to the idea that this solitary verse abrogated 120 peace verses in the Quran. He refers to this notion as, pardon my language, it's quite, how do I put it? Perhaps I should say crass, but it's not my words, it's his words. I'm quoting him when I say that he referred to this idea that a single verse of the sword abrogated 120 peace verses. Muhammad Ghazali, the Sheikh of Al-Azhar, refers to this as, and I quote, crassest stupidity, end of quote. Now, if you don't trust me for this, you can look up the quotation, it's on the internet. So that's just one person who rejects the doctrine of abrogation, at least of the Quran, by the Quran, but there are others. In the old days, the Abu Muslim al-Isfahani rejected the doctrine of abrogation of the Quran by the Quran on the basis of the 3 verses in Al-Quran where Allah Ta'ala says that we will not find any change in His words. So So now, not finding any change in the words of Allah is not consistent with the teaching of abrogation, because when those who are trying to convince us that some verses abrogate other verses in the Quran, what they are telling us that there has been a change in the words of Allah, which goes directly against what Allah teaches in the Quran. So this claim that there are verses in the Quran which abrogate other verses, to me seems like a result of very poor, I would even say substandard exegesis, and has to be rejected accordingly, because the entire assumption of abrogation attributes to Allah Ta'ala a human quality of changing his mind, you see. And Allah Ta'ala does not change his mind, and we have other verses in the Quran, 4 of them I believe, in which Allah says that we will not only not find change in his words, but we will never find a change even in his sunnah, in his way, in the way that he deals with people, in the way that he runs affairs. So once again, this doctrine of abrogation has caused a lot of misunderstanding, and has to be set aside, quite frankly. Other people who have rejected it, the doctrine of abrogation, include, I promised a few names, include Muhammad Abdu of Al-Azhar University also. His friend, I believe, Rashid Rida, also rejected the doctrine of abrogation. Muhammad Asad, the translator of the Quran, also rejected the doctrine of abrogation. Ismail Faruqi and even Said Qutb both rejected the doctrine of abrogation. Fazlur Rahman likewise rejected the doctrine of abrogation. And those people have not rejected it. I believe perhaps the Hajabira Alwani might be among them, have expressed some reservations about it or tried to explain it in some other way. Shah Waliullah apparently only found 5 cases of abrogation in the Quran, but some ulama have found, or claim to have found, as many as up to 500 cases of abrogation. Now, to me, this is preposterous, and I think, like I said, it is a result of a very, casual, cavalier reading of the Quran, a very careless reading of the Quran. So that is just one example of some of the things that went wrong in Islamic intellectual history. And this is important because the events that transpired in the intellectual history of Islam, of course, had also political effects. And among the political effects of the application of the doctrine of abrogation was the so-called wars of imperial expansion or conquest that were waged on the basis of the assumption, the very assumption that I have referred to earlier, the assumption that the verse or verses of the sword, I say verses because sometimes verse number 29 in the same surah is also taken to support the doctrine of abrogation. So the wars of conquest were basically justified by what I'm trying to say. They were justified by recourse to this doctrine of abrogation of the peace verses, by the sword verses, and this rationale for as it were, waging wars of expansion basically amounted to what some Muslim ulama have called the 6th pillar of Islam, which was to basically spread Islam by word and by the sword if necessary. So now the justification for waging these wars of expansion was provided, as I said, by recourse to the doctrine of abrogation, which in effect transformed Islam as a religion of peace, as I argue in some of my books. You can find them on Amazon. This doctrine of abrogation of the peace verses by the verse of the sword basically transformed Islam as a religion of peace into Islam as a religion of conquest and war. Now, this is a very, very major problem, I think, in even traditional Islam, because when you look at the range of scholars who supported this aggressive jihad or spreading Islam by the sword, and which jihad, by the way, has a name. It is called Jihad al-Talab. Yeah. So Jihad al-Talab is a doctrine that calls for Muslims to wage war against non-Muslims at least once a year, every year, in order to fulfill the requirements of the deen of the religion. Now, to me, this is a catastrophic misrepresentation of the teaching of Revelation. Yet, when we look at the names that supported this Jihad al-Talab, we may be in for a shock. Because not only do they include names that we would readily associate it with this aggressive kind of militant jihad, such as Sayyid Qutb, such as Maududi, such as Ibn Taymiyyah, but the people who signed up and endorsed the doctrine of Jihad al-Talab also include luminaries such as, are you ready for this? Imam al-Ghazali himself also endorsed the doctrine of aggressive jihad. In fact, he even recommended going into people's private homes and breaking their musical instruments in the privacy of their homes if these musical instruments could be heard outside on the street. Now, when I read this, I was really shocked because the Quran very clearly prohibits entering anybody's private home, anybody's home, without the permission and the invitation of the people inside. But it seems for some reason that Imam al-Ghazali disregarded this very important teaching of the Quran. And when he recommends people going into houses and breaking the musical instruments inside, I mean, how different is he from someone who pursues a kind of vigilante justice, an almost Gestapo-like approach to enforcing morality, ethics, and religion on people? Anyway, I was shocked. But he wasn't alone. There are other, luminaries, as it were, that endorse the doctrine of Jihad al-Talab. And they include, are you ready for this also? None other than Imam al-Shafi also endorsed the teaching of Jihad al-Talab, once again based on his acceptance of the doctrine of the abrogation of the peace verses by the verse of the sword, or verses of the sword. I am truly shocked, and according to one book, it is called Tackling, I believe, Takfiri Theology. It has been published by the Quilliam Foundation in the United Kingdom, and it has been authored by Saleh Ansari and Usama Hassan, edited by, I believe, Adam Dean and Majid Nawaz. In this book, you will find information according to which pretty much most of the Hanbali and Asharite scholars basically accepted the doctrine of Jihad al-Talab, or spreading Islam by the sword. Now, I am shocked. Yes, I'm a convert, and I was told when I first became a Muslim that Islam indeed is a religion of peace, and I still believe that. What I can have difficulty believing is that there have been Muslim ulama who have actually turned the teaching of Islam upside down and now are trying to tell us that somehow Allah Ta'ala changed his mind, and instead of us being peaceful, people, peacemakers, as Brother Edip Yüksel likes to put it, that instead of us being peace-loving people, he wants us to go to war against non-Muslims, even when these non-Muslims are not fighting against us or attacking us. Now, to me, this is just unbelievable. And by the way, to add one or two more names to the list of the so-called luminaries who endorse Jihad al-Talab, we can add al-Mawardi, who also endorsed the doctrine of aggressive jihad. And we can also add Ibn Khaldun even, I have found a paragraph in his Muqaddimah where he also endorses the so-called doctrine of Jihad al-Talab. In fact, I have not been able to find a name of a single major scholar who rejected the doctrine of Jihad al-Talab. Now, please help me out. What happened here? How did Islam become, in the understanding of these ulama, such a militant religion? And one more question. How far are these ulama who are telling us that Islam is a militant religion bent on spreading Islam by the sword to gain control of the whole world? How are these people fundamentally different from the groups of extremists that we have come to know in recent history as the Islamic State? Please tell me, what are the differences between these two groups? I would like to know. You can write your suggestions in the comments below. So anyway, these are just some of the concerns that I've been that I've been thinking about. And by the way, Ibn Rushd, even though I don't recall any passage where he explicitly endorsed Jihad al-Talab or aggressive jihad, he does observe that nearly all, if not all, the mainstream Muslim scholars basically endorsed this very problematic doctrine of Jihad al-Talab, of spreading Islam by the sword. So anyway, by the way, there are some hadiths also that support this teaching of Jihad al-Talab. You can find some of them in the book of Jihad, for example, in Sahih Muslim. They are there. It's not hard to find. So I think for our part, what we need to do is to rediscover Islam once again as a religion of peace, as it is in fact portrayed in Al-Quran. Now, yes, the Quran does permit fighting under certain conditions. There's no doubt about that. But there are many conditions, and there are two conditions where the Quran permits and in fact even requires fighting. One is self-defense. The other one is to fight against persecution or oppression. But nowhere in the Quran does Allah Ta'ala say that we Muslims have this, we are required to go on and try to spread Islam by the sword, in other words, to force Islam on people. No. Allah has given us freedom of the will, and He guaranteed freedom of religion in the Quran. It's stated there very clearly in Surah Al-Baqarah verse 256 and in other places also. But even here we have people who mistranslate this verse and insert in brackets the expression, the way they translate the verse, it says there's no compulsion, and then they open a bracket and then they write in entering, then they close the bracket, religion. So this is a massive falsification, I think, of the teaching of Revelation on the issue of the freedom of religion. This is an attempt by authoritarian people with tendencies to exercise dictatorial powers to force people to remain Muslims against their will by threatening to kill them if they should desire to leave the deen, which is based on a hadith narrated by Ikrimah and going back to Ibn Abbas. So one of the things that we need to do is to free our knowledge of Islam of these misconceptions and basically make a new beginning. I think that's all for now. Please leave your comments in the section below. Until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Thank you.